Hello, my name is Joe Agnello, and I'm going to do the second half of this group project. Now that Brianna has given a brief background on Professor Coykendall, I'm going to follow up with some insight I gained through my interview with him on why he does what he does and what he loves about his job and the field of communications. So when I asked Professor Coykendall what his favorite aspect of the job was, he kind of laughed and said that it wasn't grading. And he proceeded by explaining how he loves teaching technical communications. He couldn't stress enough how much he loves that class and teaching that class. And he mentioned that it's always been his favorite course to teach here at Plymouth. He said that the main reason for this is because he loves teaching students situations that they'll apply to their careers in the field. And he says teaching technical communications really brings out the coaching aspect of teaching, because it really allows him to engage with students, more one-on-one, to help them prepare for the real world. And he uses a lot of his experience in the field through the criteria in the class. So in general, he made it a point to note that the student-teacher interaction is really what he loves about the job. He loves preparing students for the next level, and that is why technical communications has always been his favorite class to teach here at Plymouth. So in regards to some other things in the field of communications, Professor Coykendall stated that theory is the most appealing subject to analyze and discuss, in his opinion. He loves comm theory because of the way that theory informs practice. And he gave me an example of when he was working at his old job at a software company, one of his first jobs out of grad school. He explained that whenever they were building software, they were using theory to make that possible. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And he also mentioned how his love for poetry really helped him understand how to communicate in that way. And he also mentioned to me that poetry and his knowledge of theory made that job of building software and communicating in such a way as a career. He said it really made that job smooth for him, and he said he was pretty good at it, and that's the combination of the two is really what made him successful in that field. He said that people who understand how theory is constructed have a huge advantage in the world. And he mentioned that he feels that communication theory teaches and analyzes a wide range of applicable instances, and he definitely showed a strong passion for that notion and just theory in general. In regards to technical communication, again, I just want to bring up a point that he made that I thought was pretty interesting. He mentioned that communicating and discussing technical issues in theory to a non-technical audience is something that he really enjoys. So we talked briefly about some of Professor Coykendall's biggest icons and influences in the field of communications. And he mentioned Janice Reddish, who we talked about briefly, but I did some outside research on. She's a highly influential writer in the field, and he says she really impacted him as a teacher with this concept of satisficing, which is a combination of satisfy and suffice. And this concept basically states that finding the most important information and relaying it effectively to others is crucial in this day and age, mainly because people don't read these days, or at least to the extent that people used to read, and people feel that they're drowning in information these days with all the sources and media, etc. So basically Janice Reddish has written a lot of articles and theories about how it's really important to satisfice and make sure as a teacher that you are relaying the most important information to your students and making sure that they understand what is most important. So I thought that was very interesting. And finally, we just kind of discussed what his primary sources of media are. I was just kind of curious what a comm professor, journalism professor, really looks at and reads as far as media. So he mentioned that he is a huge fan of NPR and BBC Radio. I thought it was kind of funny. He said he has not had a subscription to a newspaper in over 4 years. And he mentioned how weird it was to him because one of his early jobs was writing for a newspaper. For news, he's primarily interested in internet periodicals. He mentioned CNN, the New York Post, I believe. And he mentioned a pretty interesting point about internet news versus TV news. And he said, if there's an important video worth watching, CNN.com will show it to me. I don't even need to turn my TV on. And I thought that was pretty relevant and pretty true. We don't even really need to watch the news unless we want to. It's all on the internet, and it's more accessible on the internet, which is why he feels and I feel that internet media is really kind of taking over. And he also mentioned an interesting point about internet media, that there's no deadline to get stories in like printed periodicals, which makes it more flexible and accessible for breaking stories. He gave the example of the German Wings flight that went down, I think 2 weeks ago, and how he was in his office reading article after article that were a minute old instead of a day old, just chronologically relaying facts that were being discovered. So it was just really interesting to hear his input on media and which sources he uses. And overall, I really enjoyed talking to Professor Coykendall. He was a great guy and very personable, and I really look forward to having more classes with him, meeting with him again, and talking about stuff like this in the future. All right, thank you.